The summer sun beat down on Titusville, Florida, in 1982. A construction crew was hard at work, preparing the land for a new housing development called Windover Farms. Heavy machinery churned the earth, carving out retention ponds designed to manage the area's abundant rainfall. To the construction workers, it was just another day on the job. Little did they know, they were about to stumble upon a secret buried for millennia. It all began with a backhoe. As one of the operators maneuvered his machine across a particularly damp and peaty section of the property, the bucket struck something hard. At first, he assumed it was a rock. But rocks are a rarity in Florida's soft, sandy soil. Curious, the operator climbed down to investigate. Kneeling in the muddy hole, he reached in and pulled out what looked like a misshapen, dirt-stained object. As he wiped away the muck, the horrifying truth became clear. It was a human skull. Stunned and more than a little unnerved, the worker immediately alerted his supervisor. The news spread quickly through the construction site. Initial reactions were a mix of shock and unease. Was it a recent crime? Had they unearthed evidence of a murder? The supervisor immediately contacted the local authorities, who arrived on the scene within the hour. The area was cordoned off, and the construction project ground to a halt. As officers examined the site, more bones began to emerge from the dark, peaty soil. It quickly became apparent that this was more than just a single isolated find. They were looking at what appeared to be a burial ground. The Brevard County Sheriff's Department launched a preliminary investigation. Detectives cautiously began excavating around the initial discovery site. The presence of multiple skeletons raised the chilling possibility of a mass grave. Given the history of the area and the occasional unsolved missing persons case, they couldn't rule out foul play. The county coroner was called in to examine the recovered remains. It was his assessment that provided the first major clue that this was no ordinary crime scene. Something about the bones felt different. They weren't the fresh, relatively clean remains one might expect from a recent burial. These bones were dark, almost black, and strangely brittle. Their texture suggested they'd been submerged in the ground for a very, very long time. The coroner's initial assessment determined that these remains weren't from a recent death. They were ancient. Suddenly, the entire nature of the situation changed. This was no longer a police matter. It was a historical discovery. To their credit, the developers of Windover Farms recognized the significance of the find. They immediately cooperated with authorities, halting all construction activity in the affected area. More than that, they pledged financial support and resources to ensure that the site was properly excavated and studied. They even provided equipment and pumps to help drain the waterlogged ground. They understood this was about more than just fulfilling a legal obligation. It was about preserving a piece of the past. With the site deemed an archaeological find, the Brevard County Sheriff's Office passed the investigation to a team of archaeologists, including a young anthropologist from Florida State University named Dr. Glenn Doran. This decision would prove pivotal in unlocking the secrets hidden beneath the swamp. When Dr. Doran first arrived at Windover Farms, he didn't see anything particularly remarkable. To the untrained eye, it just looked like a muddy, overgrown pond. The water was dark, stained by tannins from decaying vegetation. Thick moss and algae covered the surface. It hardly seemed like the kind of place where you'd find a major archaeological discovery. But as the archaeologists began their work, meticulously clearing away layers of peat and water, Dr. Doran's initial impression quickly changed. He soon realized that this unassuming pond was anything but ordinary. With each passing day, the site revealed more and more questions, each more intriguing than the last. Why were these people buried in the middle of a swamp? What rituals or beliefs led them to choose such a location for their final resting place? More puzzling still, how had these bones survived the ravages of time in Florida's notoriously harsh climate? The state's high humidity and acidic soils typically accelerate the decomposition of organic material, often leaving little more than dust within decades. Yet here were skeletons seemingly remarkably well preserved. If the bones had been preserved so well, what else might be waiting beneath the surface? A sense of profound mystery hung over the site. Both the construction workers and the incoming team of scientists felt the weight of history pressing down on them. They were walking on hallowed ground, a place where people had lived, loved and died thousands of years ago. This wasn't just a crime scene or a construction project. It was an ancient cemetery, a portal to a forgotten world. News of the discovery spread quickly throughout the local community. The local papers ran stories about the strange find, and rumors began to swirl. Who were these people? Were they the ancestors of modern Native Americans? Were they victims of some long-forgotten catastrophe? Or could the bog be hiding something even more extraordinary? Dr. Doran and his team understood the importance of proceeding with caution and precision. Every shovelful of soil, every bone uncovered had to be meticulously documented. A single mistake could destroy evidence that had survived for millennia. They began preparing for a long and painstaking excavation, employing techniques never before used in Florida archaeology. What had started as a routine construction project had suddenly transformed into a quest to rewrite history. The Windover Pond was no longer just a swamp. It was a gateway to a world 8,000 years gone, a world whose inhabitants had left behind more than just bones. As the heavy machinery fell silent and the archaeologists took over, the swamp seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Beneath the dark water and layers of peat lay a hidden cemetery, sealed by time, waiting to reveal its secrets. But what they would eventually uncover would be far more disturbing than anyone could possibly imagine. The accidental discovery at Windover Farms was just the beginning. What followed was a meticulous archaeological endeavor, an almost surgical process of uncovering secrets buried beneath layers of peat and time. Imagine the scene: a Florida swamp, thick with humidity, the air buzzing with insects. This wasn't your typical dig site. The ground was waterlogged, the peat fragile. Traditional excavation methods were simply out of the question. Any heavy machinery or careless digging could easily destroy the delicate remains. Instead, archaeologists employed a painstaking approach. They began by carefully draining the pond, a slow and deliberate process designed to minimize disturbance. Pumps whirred day and night, gradually lowering the water level, revealing the dark, spongy peat. Then came the painstaking work of excavation itself. Armed with trowels, brushes, and even delicate tools like wooden picks and chopsticks, the team meticulously peeled away the layers of peat. Each scoop of soil was carefully examined, photographed, and documented before being removed. It was slow, methodical, and incredibly demanding work. Imagine kneeling in the humid heat, painstakingly removing a few millimeters of peat at a time, knowing that a single wrong move could erase millennia of history. But their patience was rewarded with an astonishing discovery. As they carefully worked their way through the peat, they began to uncover not just bones, but something far more remarkable: preserved brain tissue. Inside several of the skulls, nestled within the cranial cavities, was a greasy, tan-colored substance. At first, the team was skeptical. Could it really be what they thought it was? But closer examination revealed the truth. It was brain tissue, remarkably preserved after 8,000 years. The discovery sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. In a region as hot and humid as Florida, where organic matter typically decays rapidly, the preservation of soft tissue was almost unheard of. How could brains survive for so long? The answer lay in the unique environment of the Windover Pond. The peat bog was acidic and oxygen poor, creating conditions that inhibited decay. The low oxygen levels prevented the growth of bacteria that normally break down organic material. The acidity, meanwhile, helped to tan the tissues, effectively preserving them. It was as if the bog had acted as a natural time capsule, protecting these ancient brains from the ravages of time. But the discovery of preserved brain tissue was just the beginning. What secrets did these ancient brains hold? To answer that question, scientists turned to DNA analysis. They carefully extracted genetic material from both the bones and the brain tissue, hoping to unlock the secrets of the Windover people's ancestry. And what they found was both fascinating and perplexing. The DNA analysis revealed that the Windover people were related to ancient populations from Asia, supporting the theory that the first Americans had migrated across the Bering Land Bridge. However, their genetic markers didn't quite match those of modern Native American populations. This was a major surprise. If the Windover people were among the earliest inhabitants of North America, why didn't their genetic lineage continue into the present? Were they a distinct group that had died out, leaving no descendants? Or had their genetic signature been diluted over time through intermingling with other populations? The scientists had stumbled upon evidence of a potentially lost lineage of early Americans, a genetic puzzle that defied easy explanation. The implications were profound. The Windover discovery challenged the long-held assumption that all Native American populations descended from a single homogeneous group of early migrants. Instead, it suggested that the genetic history of North America was far more complex and dynamic than previously imagined. It painted a picture of multiple migrations, diverse populations, and perhaps even extinct lineages. The discovery of preserved brains and the subsequent DNA analysis transformed our understanding of early American history. It revealed a community that was both ancient and sophisticated, a people who had developed complex burial rituals and whose genetic origins were shrouded in mystery. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the discovery was the implication that entire populations could vanish from the historical record, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their existence. The Windover people, with their preserved brains and their unique genetic markers, serve as a haunting reminder of the fragility of human history and the secrets that still lie hidden beneath the surface of the earth. They challenge us to rethink our assumptions about the past and to consider the possibility that the story of human migration and evolution is far more complex and nuanced than we ever imagined. The secrets preserved in the peat of the Windover Pond have opened a window into a lost world, a world of ancient ancestors and forgotten lineages, a world that continues to fascinate and terrify us to this day. Nearly 90 of the skeletons uncovered at the site held some form of brain tissue. Some were little more than shrunken fragments, but others still displayed the folds and ridges that define human thought. Among all these finds, one stood apart. Archaeologists labeled it Burial 82. Inside this skull, the brain was so well preserved that one scientist described it as beautiful. Though reduced to perhaps 1/3 of its original size, the organ retained its familiar convolutions, the rippled patterns that once carried memory, language, and emotion. To hold such a relic was like holding a ghost of thought, a glimpse of a mind from 8 millennia ago. Under the microscope, Burial 82 revealed even more. Researchers identified remnants of nerve fibers and traces of cellular structures. This was not just an empty shell, but tissue that still carried the outlines of the complex network that had once governed a living person's body. In that moment, the past became deeply personal. Scientists were no longer studying abstract skeletons. They were peering directly into the preserved brain of an individual who had lived, worked, and died in Florida long before recorded history. The question was how such preservation could be possible. Florida's heat and humidity destroy most organic material in a matter of months. Yet here were brains that had survived for more than 8,000 years. The explanation lay in the chemistry of the bog. The peat was rich in acids and deprived of oxygen. When the bodies were placed into it, the environment acted like a natural preservative. It halted the usual decay that microbes bring, slowing the breakdown of flesh. Minerals from the surrounding water likely played a role as well, hardening and stabilizing tissue that would otherwise have dissolved. Timing was just as critical as chemistry. The degree of preservation suggested that the dead were buried almost immediately, perhaps within a day or two after death. This quick placement into the bog meant the process of decomposition barely had a chance to begin. Once submerged, the bodies rested in a natural tomb that locked them away from the destructive forces of air and sun. The significance of these preserved brains went beyond simple wonder. For the first time, scientists had the opportunity to compare the structure of ancient brains with those of modern humans. This opened new doors into the study of neurological evolution. Researchers could look for signs of disease, developmental conditions, or features that might have changed over thousands of years. What had once seemed an impossible dream became reality inside a quiet Florida swamp. When the findings were published in scientific journals, the response was electric. The 1986 report in Nature described Windover as one of the oldest known examples of preserved brain tissue with viable DNA. Suddenly, The swamp was no longer just a local curiosity, but a site of international importance. Archaeologists, geneticists, and medical researchers alike turned their attention to Windover, each hoping to extract more secrets from its silent graves. Yet with every answer came new mysteries. How many other burial sites might have once existed in similar bogs, now lost to time? Were the conditions at Windover unique, or could other communities across the ancient Americas have used similar places to preserve their dead? And what could these preserved brains reveal about the daily lives, the diets, and even the diseases of people who had lived so long ago? But this brain held more than preservation. It carried a genetic mystery that reached beyond science and into the unknown. Burial 82 was identified as a woman who had lived nearly 8,000 years ago. Based on bone analysis, the woman was about 45 years old at the time of her death. Her bones told a story of a long and difficult life. Signs of arthritis marked her spine and hands, proof that she had worked hard and carried heavy loads. Her teeth were worn down from a diet of coarse foods. Marks on her pelvis showed that she had given birth several times, evidence of her role as a mother. Yet despite the hardships, she had lived longer than many others of her time, suggesting strength, resilience, and perhaps a respected place in her community. What made her most remarkable, however, was not the story told by her bones, but the secret preserved inside her skull. Her brain, though shrunken to a fraction of its original size, retained its folds, membranes, and delicate structures. When scientists looked at it, they could still see the ridges that once carried her thoughts and memories. Under the microscope, the tissue revealed traces of nerve fibers and cell patterns that should have vanished long ago. To the researchers, it was as if her mind had been sealed away, waiting for them to uncover it. The shock deepened when DNA was taken from her brain tissue and bone marrow. Most ancient remains in the Americas fall into 5 well-documented mitochondrial haplogroups labeled A, B, C, D, and X. These are genetic families that map out the migrations of people from Asia into the New World. But the woman's DNA did not match these known groups. Instead, it revealed a rare marker, an anomalous lineage that did not align neatly with any population recognized in North or South America. At first, scientists wondered if it was an error, a fluke in the lab. But the mystery grew when 2 other individuals from Windover were later found to carry the same unusual marker. They had been buried in different parts of the pond and were not closely related to her or to each other. This ruled out the possibility of a single family trait or a localized anomaly. What they had uncovered was the footprint of a genetic line that no longer exists. The implications were unsettling, even terrifying. Could there once have been a branch of early Americans who disappeared entirely, leaving no descendants? Was this evidence of a population wiped out by disease, conflict, or changing environments? Or had their genetic traces simply been swallowed up and erased as other groups mingled and spread across the continent? The Windover woman, with her impossible brain, raised questions that challenged the simplest models of human migration and survival. Her brain also showed structural features that caught the attention of scientists. Subtle differences were noticed in its shape and organization. Her frontal lobes appeared slightly larger than expected, and the symmetry between the hemispheres was not quite the same as in modern populations. The differences were not enough to suggest disease or developmental abnormalities, but they hinted at traits that may have belonged to her vanished lineage. Were these natural variations, signs of adaptation to a unique environment, or telltale signs of a genetic heritage that disappeared with her people? No one could say for certain. If even the most intact brain could not connect these people to any living tribe, then their story remains suspended between discovery and mystery. Let's return to the swamp itself, where questions linger like whispers in the water, reminding us that Windover's secrets are far from fully uncovered.